Lawyers who read wills to families. What is the most interesting, bizarre, offensive, surprising thing you have had to read out loud? To my wife I'll leave her lover and the knowledge that I was never the fool she thought me. To my son I'll leave the pleasure of working for a living. For 25 years, he thought the pleasure was all mine. Best diss ever. Was in my wills and trusts book in law school as an example of people talking crap in their wills. You're supposed to discourage them as lawyers from doing so. A friend of mine was adopted at birth. When her mom died, the will gave half the estate to her 2 natural daughters. My friend got nothing. WTF. That was vindictive beyond belief. It's like saying yeah I raised you, but you were never truly my child. Best will story I personally know of. The father had a valuable antique grandfather clock. He also had 2 daughters. His solution: if I die on an even day, daughter A gets the clock, an odd day and daughter B gets it. The daughter who did not get the clock got an equivalent cash award based on the value of the clock. I know of the event because I had to service the clock several times over the years. We had the client itemize his rock collection in his will, including directions that certain rocks be deposited in certain rivers across Canada. My father-in-law was an accountant for some rather wealthy people. One of them was asking him to assist with writing up his will worth millions. The final addition he suggested was that if the children contested it, they get nothing. They contested it for years. It must be a bad feeling knowing you raised that sort of kids. I literally cannot imagine fighting with my sister over money. She has a hard time letting me pick up, like, every 4th restaurant check. We had a client who was a widowed farmer who owned several heavy equipment, Caterpillar trucks, etc. He had 2 sons who were already working with him at the farm and a daughter who was working in the city. He willed the heavy equipment to the daughter. When asked why, since these equipment were essential to the farm, he said that the farm was to go his kids equally, but his girl needed to know he always wanted her to join their venture and dispel her notions of alienation because she was a girl. Lawyer here. I once amended a will for a doctor in which he disinherited his son by removing everything he had intended to bequeath and replacing it with a manure spreader. I didn't ask any questions because changing a will is an easy thing to do. But one day, that doctor will die and his son will have essentially be told to eat crap. I was working as a legal secretary and had to leave someone's cats to various people. Fine. But I also had to leave money in the cat's name to various organizations. One of them was named Mr. Bobo. I enjoyed it thoroughly. My maternal grandpa was wealthy. He divorced my maternal grandma, remarried, and promptly dropped dead of a heart attack. He was only 48 and had no will, so everything went to his new wife, my mom's stepmother. She was actually really nice and was planning on making sure that everything was fair, till she died in a car accident 6 months later. She was a widow herself prior to marrying grandpa and had a now orphaned 15-year-old son from the previous marriage who got everything. My mom and her siblings had to go to the auction at their childhood home and buy back as much of their heirlooms and memories as they could afford, and, truthfully, stole some of what they couldn't. Tons. One client left a specific gift of $10,000 to one son, and left him out of the per stripes division of the residual estate, which was sizable at the time the will was drafted. This was intended as a serious disinheritance, which he apparently talked about all the time to make the disfavored son feel bad. However, by the time he died he had a serious reversal of fortune and his estate was about $10,000. So he effectively disinherited the good children and left the black sheep everything. The bad kid appeared very poor compared to the others, and the look of grateful surprise on the poor kid's face was almost as priceless as the shock on the others who thought they were getting rich. I heard this from another lawyer. Rich old lady leaves her entire sizable estate in a trust for the care and maintenance of her dog, as long as the dog shall live. On the dog's death, the trust paid out in full to the son. Apparently the son had Rover put down the day after the funeral and presented a demand to the trustee the very next day for the trust payout. She should have seen that one coming. I know. No lawyer here, but I had to share. A woman came in after her mother's funeral with some correspondence from the company I worked for, insurance. She was worried there was a bill she needed to pay and was coming to tell us her mom had died. She just looked so tired, and we got to talking while I looked up the policy to close it out. She shared that in the last few years her mom had slipped into dementia and she single-handedly took care of her. How she missed her but just was run ragged and she hadn't taken a vacation in forever. I realized what she had was not a health policy, it was a life insurance policy naming the daughter as the beneficiary for about $50k. I told her and she just started crying. It made me cry and I got up and hugged her and sort of just held her while she cried. She pulled away and said, "I have no idea what she left that for. Everything's been paid for." I said, "This might be her telling you to go on that vacation and relax." It was so touching, and she had no idea that the policy existed. My estate planning professor told us about a guy who had two families, neither of which knew about the other until it was time to read the will. This wasn't like a love child mistress type scenario, both were nuclear multi-kid families. Both families showed up for what had to be one of the most awkward will reading in history. I don't really know how he pulled it off other than that he was away on business frequently. But here, have my mediocre will story anyway. My great-grandmother left her daughter just $1 and not a single penny more, so help me God. This was before I was born. But my grandmother, not the daughter with the dollar, said that when they all read the will her sister had a full-blown temper tantrum and no one heard from her since. I guess she had it coming. In olden days, it used to be typical to bequeath $1 so that, if challenged, the judge saw that they were not forgotten and purposefully meant to not get more. If a close family member or loved one got nothing, they would often challenge they were forgotten. Might not be true in this case but something I remember studying. In my trusts and estates class in law school, we read a case about a man who left everything to his wife, but only if she got his body stuffed and left it on the living room couch forever. Luckily for her, the court invalidated that part of the husband's will. Part of the reasoning was that it would make it impossible for her to date remarry if she had her husband's creepy dead body glaring at anyone who came to see her. My grandfather, a Vietnam War veteran, suffered from PTSD. It got worse in his later years and he would often isolate himself from the rest of the family, often hiding out in his bedroom when visitors were over. My grandmother would often tell us stories about how he had inherited a significant amount of money from his father way back when. She said that in their younger years he often spent his inheritance on luxurious dates and trips. After returning from war, he spent the remaining money on a house in which he and my grandmother settled and raised their children. Fast forward to his death, just a couple months back, and we found out he had written a will. Even my grandmother didn't know about it. We all had assumed he wouldn't have much to leave since most of the money he had saved from his time in the military was going towards taking care of him as he was placed in a care facility as his PTSD worsened. His will told of a warehouse in Township, Michigan that held a large collection of vintage cars. He said that the warehouse was passed down from his father, and he had all the documents to prove that he was the owner of some type of warehouse. His will estimated that the cars be worth in excess of $2 million total. The money from his collection would be split between his 4 children. We had no idea this collection ever existed. My father and his 3 brothers had all grown up in Plano, Texas. None of us had ever been to Michigan before. Even our mother couldn't recall a time of our father ever having even gone to visit Michigan. After a long debate, my father and I, the only ones who could manage to find some time off from work, agreed to fly out to Michigan to see this collection firsthand. After a few $1,000s spent on plane tickets, hotels, we finally arrived at the warehouse my grandfather owned. It was a rundown warehouse, but it was tucked away within a compound of other warehouses that seemed to be otherwise well taken care of. Finally, code in hand, my father punched the numbers into the keypad and the giant door began to rise. What was inside was beyond words. There was absolutely nothing. Besides a few homeless people that managed to sneak in through a hole in the corrugated metal around back, there was no car collection. We were able to contact a few owners of the neighboring warehouses, and to their knowledge no one and nothing had ever been inside of those warehouses in the years they had been there. To this day we don't know what happened. We all just assume that the PTSD caused him to create some kind of fantasy in his mind. That maybe he purchased the warehouse believing it was a safe house for him if he ever needed to get out of Plano. My grandfather hated his neighbor. They lived next to each other for 20+ years. I remember well my grandfather raging at every opportunity about this guy. We never saw them speak to each other. In grandpa's will he left the guy $10k, a car and golf clubs. We were dumbstruck. Turns out they were good buddies from the army. When they coincidentally bought homes next to each other, they decided to play a long scam with both their families. They actually played golf together 2-3x per week and had a monthly poker game for years. To my daughter Anne, who created my beautiful granddaughter Jane, and her dear fourth husband John, who laid hands on my Jane, I leave $1, you money grubbing bastards. To Jane I'll leave all of my monetary assets, save $5,000 and my best gun, which I'll leave to my son Bill, on the condition that he beats John bloody during the time between my funeral and my burial. Jane, bail your uncle out of jail, please. Other than names, this is the exact wording of a great uncle's will, part of it anyway. At age 9, Jean told her mother that John had molested her and her mother told her she deserved it for being a S. So great uncle took Jean in and raised her, and his 2 kids got exactly what it says. His son also got a truck and technically a house, although he only kept it until Jean was a legal adult and could afford the tax on it. Bill got full custody of Jane when his father died, and he put every penny of her money into a trust fund to mature when she was 25 because he felt like his sister would try to get the money. He was right. And in case anyone wondered, yes, Bill got his $5,000. He didn't get arrested though because John had a warrant on him, so they didn't dare call the cops. Bill did kindly inform the police of his whereabouts a few weeks later. That is beautiful. Something about revenge from beyond the grave, or at least on the way to it. Not a lawyer, but sort of a sad story. When my dad's mother died, her will stipulated that everything was to be liquidated and the money distributed equally between her children and grandchildren. Fine, but literally everything had to be sold. There were family heirlooms, jewelry, things my grandfather, a carpenter, had made, so many sentimental family things that my father and his siblings badly wanted, but it all had to be sold. They all went to the auction to try to buy some of the more sentimental items but weren't always successful. It was heartbreaking, and I'm not sure what made my grandmother think it would be a good idea. Nobody wanted the money. They wanted her wedding ring and the clocks my grandfather had made and all that. It was heartbreaking, and I'm not sure what made my grandmother think it would be a good idea. Nobody wanted the money. They wanted her wedding ring and the clocks my grandfather had made and all that. Most likely she didn't want her family fighting over her belongings. I used to work for an accountant and we used to make wills as well. An old man probably around 70 left all his money to his mistress while his wife only got the goldfish. I had to tell him that if his wife contested it she would most definitely win. He said he didn't care. Not me, but my friend's father's father died, and he said when the guy reviewed the will with his lawyer and his sister, it said to give 100% of the assets to his sister. He said he had no idea why his father did that. He wasn't on bad terms or anything. It was shocking to him. The sister didn't share anything with him either, and they were on pretty good terms before that. When my great uncle died, he left his beloved dog to his longtime girlfriend. All of his money went into a pet trust for said dog, which turned out to be quite a large sum of money. His 2 kids got nothing. As far as I know, he didn't have a bad relationship with them or anything. He just thought the world of his little dog. One summer I worked as an administrative assistant to a lawyer who worked in wills and estates. Most of it was the usual petty arguing about percentages of money, but one couple was deeply concerned about which of their children would receive the urn with the ashes of the family's long deceased cat. Wouldn't want to play favorites. One of my college buddies' dad died from cancer in our 2nd year. It wasn't a sudden death. He had been battling it for a couple years. When my friend came back to school, he casually mentioned that his dad left him and his sister $7 million each. Turns out, his dad had hit the lottery before my friend was born, invested, put all the money away to help pay for college, high school. His mom got a nice chunk of change also. He grew up thinking they were just ordinary middle class family. We had a glorious 3rd and 4th year of college, thanks to my loaded friend. Someone had left an entire golf course that he owned and managed in secret to his son. They were avid golfers, but always went to another course. I still don't know why someone would lie about owning a golf course. My will has something unusual. Story time. I sat my wife down to have the talk because I was getting ready to deploy to Iraq. This was during the incredible sectarian violence, and I wanted to make sure she knew everything to do in case I died. She's never serious, ever. but I wanted her to be serious for this discussion because it was damned important. I get through telling her all about it and want to know if she has questions. Yeah, so, the life insurance. How does that work? She says. I don't really know, baby. What do you mean? She answers, well, do they just put the money in there? Look, she's not trying to be an butthole, right? It's not like she's just dying for the money. She wants to know the logistics of it. I'm sitting here thinking when she says, so do they put in my bank account? Or do they give you one of those big checks when you win the lottery? As she holds her hands up like she's holding a huge check. Laughter ensues. I have it written into the will that if I'm Kia, I want the $400k to be given to her with a gigantic lottery check. Have base photo bring several folks over. Shoot like the paparazzi she stands on a stage. And do it. Lol. Not exactly a reading of the will story but in the same realm. When I was like 20 my dad told me that when he died I would be getting a chunk of money. Not millions but enough to do something good with. Years later he and my mom separated. He met a new woman and got married. After talking to my brother and sister we were all worried that she would change his will or get him to change it in favor of her kids. We agreed that we didn't want money but just wanted any final wishes to be honored. The money couldn't hurt though. Sadly after that he got cancer and died 2 years ago. After he died my siblings and I agreed to just accept however his widow divided anything. She made sure things went where he had decided. My percentage was smaller because he had added her and her children. In the 2 years since he passed she hasn't talked to us much. She calls for holidays and stuff. She tries but she is just kinda awkward. She's also sent large sums of money on 2 occasions because she sold some land he owned. She has shown me and my siblings that there are still good people. Sure she might have kept most of the money but she could have kept all of the money and we would never have known. When I was 16 my dad wrote me out of his will and then hung himself in the garage. It was few months after my older brother had died in a car wreck. Funny thing is, we always got along. I was then kicked out of the house by his wife, without a single thing that was mine. It was on Christmas Eve, so I went to my mom's for a night, and when I came back to my dad's, the locks were changed. Not a single shirt, not a shoe, not a sock, nothing but the cloths on my back and the change in my pocket. When I was a clerk in law school at the State Court of Appeals the adult children of a rich woman tried to invalidate the will. Basically the woman was worth about $8 million and all the children were working professionals earning 6 or 7 figures. Well the woman had used the same hairdresser for multiple years and left a considerable amount in a trust for the hairdresser's children's education. The remainder of the estate was given to different charities. Basically the kids were mad they didn't get a cut. If it comes up, like, if you're wealthy, leaving $1,000 to each kid will make it a lot more difficult to invalidate. Leave them nothing and they can create a lot of doubt and questions. You've been visited by the bush papa boop nose for 10 years. Good luck and cuddles. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.